In this lecture, we're going to look at engaging the audience. And that means two things. First, asking questions. And second, creating rapport with your audience. Creating rapport means to let the audience feel like you are a real person and that they can interact with you. And it just makes the atmosphere more comfortable. So let's take a look at asking questions. Before you present a key point, or maybe during your introduction, you may ask a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question that you do not expect anyone to answer. In fact, you will answer your own question. Now, this is very good for getting the audience to think about the topic, and you can kind of guide their thinking to go the direction of your talk. For example, if you use a question, "Is this good enough?" then the audience immediately wants to answer that question in their heads. It's human nature. So you don't want to leave too much of a gap there, because then people will start answering. About 1 second is plenty. So for example, "Is this good enough?" "No, it's not." "Do you know what happened?" "Well, let me tell you." Because if you say, "Do you know what happened?" then the audience will start answering your question. So you don't want that to happen. A rhetorical question is a question that you ask before a key point, and then you answer it about 1 second later. And this is a very good technique for engaging the audience to think more deeply about your topic. Okay, another kind of question you might want to ask is a clarifying question to check understanding. Now, this is very important if you're presenting some information which may be difficult to understand. So this is just checking understanding. You can do this at any point in your presentation. If you look around the room and you see that some people maybe have an angry look on their face, this often means they're concentrating very hard. Or if you see people whose eyes have glassed over and they're not really paying attention, you might stop your talk briefly and ask, "Is that clear?" Or, "Are there any questions about that?" Or, "Any questions at this point?" And this shows the audience that you want them to understand and that you're willing to put in the extra effort to explain it to them if need be. Okay, so those are asking questions there. Now, creating rapport, this just means that you're building a relationship between you and the audience. And one way to do that is to acknowledge that you are speaking to experts in your field, maybe. So, for example, you might use an expression like, "I'm sure everyone in this room knows that this is a problem." Or, "I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that we need to change this." Or, "As you probably know, this has been happening for some time." So these kinds of expressions, they show the audience that you are kind of deferring to them, that you acknowledge their expertise, and that you're not trying to come across as someone who knows more than they do. So it's a very good technique for getting the audience on your side from the beginning. Now, you may also use language to speak diplomatically. For example, during the question and answer session, if someone asks a very difficult question, you don't want to come across too strongly. So in that case, it's good to use expressions that make your opinion seem a little softer. For example, if someone says, "Don't you think this is a little too simple?" Rather than answering directly with your opinion, you could use an expression like, "Well, I tend to think that simplicity is more effective than being difficult." Or, "It seems to me that this is the best way to present the information." So these are hedging expressions. They don't necessarily weaken your position, but they do show that you are being diplomatic, and actually you'll come across as sounding more confident when you use these expressions with a strong opinion. So speaking diplomatically, this could be at any point during the presentation if someone asks a question, or if you're presenting some new or maybe challenging information, potentially challenging information, you could use one of these expressions here. Also, creating rapport, just a general rule, a general guideline is try to use more we statements and fewer I statements. So for example, instead of saying, I would like to know more about this. You might say, I'm sure we would like to know more about this. So where possible, try to use we statements instead of I. It builds cohesion and it makes the presentation more enjoyable for everyone involved. Okay, let's take a look at some expressions in action for asking questions to engage the audience. This shows how English is used throughout the world in science. But how else is English used? And did you know that 80% of all language on the internet is English? And how many words are there in English? Do you know? 50,000? 100,000? The unabridged Oxford English. So we saw some rhetorical questions asked that would help the audience to think more deeply about the key points during the presentation. In this lecture, we looked at asking two types of questions. First, rhetorical, or those questions that you answer yourself. And second, clarification questions, checking understanding. We also looked at creating rapport, and you can do this by acknowledging that everyone is an expert before stating a fact, speaking diplomatically before giving a strong opinion or some challenging information. And we also looked at using we statements instead of I statements.